At family vacation planning, I heard Mom tell my aunts, "We can't afford extra rooms for failures like Emma. This trip is for successful family members only." Then I called my resort manager. The words hit me like a physical blow to the chest. I stood frozen in my home office, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to my mother's voice through the paper-thin walls of our duplex. The conversation was happening in her kitchen, just 15 feet away, and she had no idea I could hear every cruel word. "Smart thinking, Rebecca," Aunt Linda's voice chimed in approvingly. "Why waste money on someone who can't contribute anyway?" "Exactly," Mom continued with satisfaction. "Emma can stay home with her minimum wage lifestyle while the successful family members enjoy themselves." I felt something cold wash over me, starting in my stomach and spreading outward until my entire body felt numb. After 28 years of subtle dismissals and backhanded comments, they'd finally said it out loud. I wasn't worth including because I was poor. I wasn't successful enough to deserve a place in their family vacation. But as I sat there processing their words, something shifted in my mind. The hurt was still there, burning in my chest like acid, but underneath it was something much more dangerous: clarity. They thought they were discussing a family vacation to some random resort. What they didn't realize was that they were planning to stay at a property I'd owned for 3 years. I opened my laptop and pulled up the Azure Coast Resort reservation system, scrolling through until I found what I was looking for. Mitchell Family, 8 guests presidential suite package, $18,000 for the week. The same family who claimed they couldn't afford an extra room for their poor daughter had somehow found money for the most expensive accommodation tier at my resort. The irony was so perfect, it almost made me laugh. Almost. Instead, I felt that familiar analytical mind taking over, the same strategic thinking that had built my consulting empire while they assumed I was scraping by on minimum wage jobs. They wanted to exclude me because I wasn't successful enough? Time to show them exactly how successful their failure of a daughter really was. I picked up my phone with steady hands and dialed James Henley, my resort's general manager. What my family had never understood was that their minimum wage daughter had been running the most successful hospitality consulting firm on the East Coast for the past decade. Marshall Hospitality Solutions didn't just advise hotels and resorts. We specialized in complete operational transformations, taking failing properties and turning them into profitable enterprises. My client list read like a who's who of luxury hospitality. The Ritz-Carlton chain had hired me to restructure their Miami operations. 4 Seasons had brought me in to salvage their troubled San Francisco property. Mandarin Oriental had paid me $2 million to design their expansion strategy into secondary markets. The Azure Coast Resort had been my favorite acquisition precisely because it represented everything I'd learned about the industry. When the pandemic hit in 2020, the previous owners had been hemorrhaging money at a rate of $400,000 per month. The 200-room beachfront property had prime real estate, but terrible management, outdated systems, and no strategic vision. I'd purchased it for $12 million, roughly 60% of its pre-pandemic value. I spent another $8 million on renovations designed around the luxury hospitality principles I'd been perfecting for years. Under my direction, we'd transformed every aspect of the resort. The infinity pools were positioned for maximum sunset views. The spa featured treatments I'd adapted from successful properties in Thailand and Switzerland. The 3 restaurants showcased regional cuisine designed by James Beard Award winners I'd recruited personally. Most importantly, I'd implemented revenue management systems that had increased per-room profitability by 340%, while maintaining 87% occupancy rates even during low season. But Azure Coast was just the flagship of a much larger empire. My real estate portfolio included 14 properties worth $47 million combined. luxury hotels in Charleston and Savannah, boutique resorts in the Hamptons and Martha's Vineyard, and urban properties in Atlanta and Nashville. Marshall Hospitality Solutions generated $8 million in annual revenue, and my personal net worth had crossed $15 million 2 years ago. The consulting work gave me strategic advantages my family couldn't even imagine. I had relationships with the most influential people in hospitality, tourism, and luxury services. Hotel general managers called me for advice on everything from staffing challenges to celebrity guest relations. Tourism boards hired me to develop destination marketing strategies. I'd been featured in Travel Plus Leisure, Condé Nast Traveler, and Hospitality Design as one of the industry's rising stars. More importantly, I'd built comprehensive intelligence about every aspect of the hospitality ecosystem. I knew which properties were struggling financially, which management companies were losing contracts, and which destinations were seeing declining tourism revenue. This knowledge had allowed me to make strategic investments and acquisitions that seemed impossibly well-timed to outside observers. My family had no idea that their mysterious run of good fortune over the past few years had been carefully orchestrated by me. Dad's construction company had been failing since 2019, surviving only because I'd arranged contracts through my network of hotel clients who needed reliable local contractors. Mom's boutique had been hemorrhaging money until bulk orders started appearing from shell companies I controlled, providing the cash flow that kept her business afloat. My brother Jake's law practice had been struggling until high-paying corporate clients, all my contacts, began seeking his services for routine legal work. They thought their recent success was due to hard work and superior business acumen. In reality, they'd been living off my secret financial support while treating me like the family charity case. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. I'd been subsidizing their lifestyles for years while they looked down on me for being unsuccessful. The conversation I'd just overheard was the final piece of evidence I needed. They didn't just dismiss me. They actively excluded me because they genuinely believed I was too poor and unsuccessful to belong with them. Time to show them exactly what their poor daughter was capable of. "Good morning, James," I said when my resort manager answered. "I see we have a Mitchell family reservation for next week." "Yes, Ms. Marshall. 8 guests in the presidential suite package. They specifically requested our most exclusive services. Private beach access, helicopter transfers, the works. One of our highest value bookings this quarter." I smiled coldly. "I need you to call the primary contact, Rebecca Mitchell, and inform her that the owner has requested their reservation be canceled immediately." There was a pause. James had worked for me for 18 months and knew better than to question my decisions. But this was unusual even by my standards. "Of course. Any particular reason I should provide?" "Simply state that the owner has requested their removal. Nothing more. I'll handle any follow-up personally." "Understood. I'll make the call within the hour." 20 minutes later, my phone rang. Mom's contact photo filled the screen, a selfie she'd taken at her boutique back when she thought her business was thriving on its own merit. "Emma," she said breathlessly, "you'll never believe what just happened. The Azure Coast Resort just called and canceled our entire reservation. They said the owner requested our removal." I kept my voice carefully neutral, even as satisfaction coursed through me. "That's terrible, Mom. Did they give you a reason?" "No. The manager just said owner's orders and hung up. We've lost our entire deposit, $1,300, and it's too late to book anywhere else decent for next week." The panic in her voice was music to my ears. This was the same woman who had declared me too poor for family vacation 30 minutes earlier. Now she was discovering exactly what it felt like to be excluded and dismissed. "I'm so sorry to hear that," I said, maintaining my concerned tone. "Did you try asking them to reconsider?" "I called back 3 times. They won't even discuss it. The manager said the decision is final and non-negotiable." Her voice was rising with panic. "Emma, we need to find somewhere else to stay. Do you have any ideas?" The irony was exquisite. The woman who had declared me too poor for vacation was now asking for my help after being ejected from my own resort. I pretended to consider her request thoughtfully. "Well," I said slowly, "I might know someone who could help. Let me make some calls." What I actually did was text James. "Please inform Mrs. Mitchell that due to the owner's generosity, alternative accommodations have been arranged at the Seaside Inn for their stay. Rooms will be complimentary, but they'll need to cover their own meals and activities." The Seaside Inn was a modest 2-star property I'd purchased 6 months ago specifically for renovation. It was clean and safe, but decidedly basic, the kind of place my family would normally never consider. Small rooms, continental breakfast, no spa services, and a tiny outdoor pool that hadn't been updated since the 1990s. Perfect accommodations for people who thought I was too unsuccessful to include in their vacation plans. An hour later, Mom called back, sounding ecstatic. "Emma, you're amazing. Somehow the resort manager found us alternative accommodations. It's not as fancy, but it's free. How did you manage that?" "I know people in the hospitality industry," I said simply, which was technically true. "I'm glad I could help." The family group chat exploded with gratitude and speculation about my mysterious connections. Suddenly, the daughter they'd deemed too poor to include had somehow salvaged their vacation. The cognitive dissonance was delicious, but I wasn't finished. This was just the opening move in a much larger strategy. The next morning, I called my assistant Jennifer and outlined the next phase of my plan. "I need you to arrange something for next week. I'll be staying at the Azure Coast Resort Presidential Suite. I want full VIP treatment, and I want it documented." Jennifer had been working for me for 4 years and understood my strategic thinking better than most. "Should I arrange for the photographer to capture your arrival?" "Yes, and make sure the resort social media team posts everything. I want my family to see exactly who owns their dream vacation spot." I also called David Halifax, my business attorney, and Elena Vasquez, my publicity consultant. David specialized in corporate law and family business disputes, while Elena handled public relations for several high-profile hospitality executives. Both had been urging me for months to be more public about my success, arguing that my deliberately low profile was limiting my business growth. "Emma, this is exactly the kind of strategic revelation I've been recommending," Elena said when I explained the situation. "Your story, successful female entrepreneur building an empire while family underestimates her. That's compelling narrative with broad appeal. We can control exactly how this story gets told." David's response was more cautionary but equally supportive. "Document everything. If you're ending financial support to family members who've been receiving it without knowledge, we need clean legal documentation to prevent future disputes." Meanwhile, my family was discovering the reality of their free accommodations at the Seaside Inn. Mom's Instagram posts became increasingly strained as she tried to maintain the illusion of a luxurious vacation, while clearly struggling with the downgrade. "Having such a unique experience at this charming local property." She captioned a photo of her cramped room. The comments from relatives were telling. "Looks different from the photos you showed us," and "Are you sure this is the same place?" On Wednesday morning, Azure Coast Resort's Instagram account posted a series of professionally shot photos with the caption, "Welcome back to our valued owner, Ms. Emma Marshall, enjoying another perfect stay at Azure Coast's Presidential Suite." The photos showed me lounging by the private infinity pool, dining at the exclusive owner's table, and being personally greeted by the entire management team. The caption included details about my ownership of the property and my recent expansion of the resort's amenities. My phone started ringing at "Emma." Mom's voice was breathless, panicked. "I just saw... Did you buy a resort?" I took a sip of my coffee, sitting on the private balcony of the presidential suite with a perfect view of the ocean I owned. "I own several properties, Mom. Azure Coast is one of them." Silence. Then, "You own the resort? The one that kicked us out?" "Yes, the one you said I was too poor to afford a room at." I could hear Dad and Jake talking frantically in the background. The pieces were finally clicking together for them. But how? Your job? You said you work in consulting. I do work in consulting. Marshall Hospitality Solutions has been quite successful. Successful enough to acquire a $47 million real estate portfolio over the past decade. $47 million! Her voice was barely a whisper. Yes. Including the resort you're not staying at. And ironically, the construction contracts that saved Dad's business in 2020, the bulk orders that kept your boutique profitable, and the corporate clients that built Jake's law practice. Another silence. I could hear her explaining this to the others, their voices growing louder and more frantic in the background. Emma, we had no idea. Yes, I noticed. You assumed I was poor because I chose to live modestly and work quietly. You never asked about my actual career or income. But why didn't you tell us? This was the moment I'd been preparing for, the chance to explain exactly what I'd learned about my family's true feelings toward me. Because I wanted to see how you treat family members when you think they have nothing to offer, and I learned everything I needed to know. The financial consequences I unleashed were swift and comprehensive. Within hours of that phone call, I activated what I'd mentally dubbed the Mitchell Family Withdrawal Plan, a systematic termination of all the secret support I'd been providing for years. My business manager, Patricia, sent formal notices to all affected parties. Dad received termination letters for 3 major construction contracts worth $189,000 annually. Projects I'd arranged through hotel clients who needed reliable local contractors. Mom's boutique lost bulk orders worth $52,000 per quarter, purchases I'd been making through shell companies to keep her cash flow positive. Jake's law firm was informed that 5 corporate clients would not be renewing their retainers, representing $78,000 in annual revenue that I'd been channeling to him through my business network. The secondary effects rippled through the extended family as well. Uncle Robert learned that his restaurant's mysterious investor would be withdrawing support, ending the $5,000 monthly subsidies that had kept him afloat during the pandemic. Aunt Linda discovered that her real estate deals had been funded by loans from companies I controlled, loans that were now being called in immediately. The family group chat went completely silent. Then, one by one, they started calling. Dad was first. Emma, honey, I think there's been a misunderstanding about those construction contracts. Jake was second. Sis, my corporate clients are saying something about terminated retainers. Can we talk? Uncle Robert was third. Emma, sweetheart, my restaurant investor is pulling out. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that. Each conversation followed the same pattern: shock, denial, desperate bargaining, and finally pleading. They'd all assumed their recent success was due to their own efforts and superior business acumen. None of them had questioned the sudden influx of high-paying clients and mysterious opportunities that had transformed their struggling businesses into profitable enterprises. But the most telling call came from Aunt Linda at, Emma, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Of course. How long have you been supporting all of us? I paused, considering how much to reveal. About 5 years actively. I started small, helping Dad get contracts, sending customers to Mom's boutique. As my business grew, I expanded the support. Why? Because you're my family. I thought family helped each other. And we never knew. I specifically structured everything to be anonymous. I wanted you to maintain your dignity and independence. But we treated you like... Her voice cracked. Like you were poor. Like you were a failure. Like you didn't belong. There was a long pause. I could hear her crying softly. Emma, we were wrong. Completely wrong. Is there any way to fix this? I don't know, Aunt Linda. You spent years making me feel worthless because you thought I had no money. Now that you know I have money, suddenly I'm worth treating with respect? It wasn't about the money. It was entirely about the money. Every cruel comment, every exclusion, every dismissive remark was based on your assumption that I was financially unsuccessful. She started crying harder. We're going to lose everything. Maybe. Or maybe you'll discover what you're actually capable of when you're not relying on my secret support. 2 weeks later, the family dynamics had completely shifted in ways that revealed just how transactional their affections had always been. Mom had to close her boutique after losing the bulk orders that had been keeping it profitable. Dad's construction business was scrambling to replace the terminated contracts, laying off workers and downsizing operations. Jake was working 18-hour days trying to replace the corporate clients whose retainers I'd been funding. But the most interesting development was their sudden flood of attention toward me. Invitations to family dinners arrived daily. Phone calls just to check in became frequent. Relatives who hadn't spoken to me in years were suddenly interested in my life, my career, my business strategies. The transformation was so obvious it was almost comical. During my first family dinner in months, the conversation was carefully, artificially focused on my achievements. Everyone wanted to hear about my business, my properties, my success story. The same relatives who'd spent years changing the subject when I tried to discuss my work were now hanging on every word. "We're so proud of you, Emma," Mom announced to the table. "We always knew you'd be successful." I set down my fork and looked directly at her. "Really? Because 3 weeks ago you told Aunt Linda I was too poor for family vacation." The table went silent. "That was a misunderstanding," Mom started weakly. "No, it wasn't. It was an accurate representation of how you all viewed me. The only thing that's changed is your knowledge of my bank account." "Emma," Dad interjected, "family is about more than money." "You're absolutely right, Dad. Family is about more than money. It's about respect, support, and unconditional love. Things I provided for all of you, and things you never provided for me." "We love you," Jake began. "Do you, or do you love what I can do for you financially?" No one answered. "Here's what's going to happen," I continued. "I'm willing to rebuild relationships with family members who can prove they value me as a person, not as a bank account. But the financial support is permanently ended." 1 year later, my relationships with family members exist across a spectrum that perfectly reflects their true character. Tyler, Jake's 16-year-old son, remained close to me throughout the entire ordeal. He'd been the only family member to consistently treat me with respect regardless of what he thought my financial situation was, and he was the only one whose college fund remained intact. He now works part-time at one of my properties, learning business skills and developing genuine expertise in hospitality management. A few cousins reached out with what seemed like genuine apologies and efforts to reconnect as people rather than financial opportunities. Those relationships are slowly rebuilding on healthier foundations based on mutual respect rather than assumed financial inequality. But others revealed their true priorities. Mom and Dad maintained minimal contact, clearly frustrated by my refusal to resume financial support. Jake initially tried to rebuild our relationship, but his efforts decreased significantly once it became clear I wouldn't be referring business to his struggling law firm. Uncle Robert and Aunt Linda essentially disappeared from my life once their financial situations became untenable without my secret subsidies. The most satisfying validation came 8 months after the resort incident, when Azure Coast Resort was featured in Travel Plus Leisure as one of the country's top destination properties. The article included a detailed profile of me as a successful young entrepreneur who'd built a hospitality empire while maintaining a deliberately low profile. The piece highlighted my strategic acquisitions, innovative management approaches, and the remarkable transformation of struggling properties into profitable luxury destinations. Today, my business continues to thrive with 3 new property acquisitions in the pipeline and consulting contracts that have expanded internationally. My personal net worth has grown to $22 million, and Marshall Hospitality Solutions was recently valued at $35 million by investors interested in expansion opportunities. Most importantly, I've learned to value relationships based on genuine mutual respect rather than family obligation or financial convenience. The Azure Coast Resort still receives regular visits from family members, but they book standard rooms and pay their own way, finally understanding that respect isn't conditional on bank account balances.